Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor Thompson, and I want to share a story that might just tug at your heartstrings. The moment you realize the people you love most, the children you spent your entire life raising, turn their backs on you as you face a cancer diagnosis. Even more shocking, in the depths of that loneliness, I found a stranger, a young woman named Sophie, who became my true family. The one I chose to leave everything to in my will. This is a journey from heartbreak to healing, from loss to rediscovering myself. If you're ready to dive into this story, drop a comment below to let me know where you're tuning in from, and please hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories like this. Let's get started. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, back when family was the heartbeat of life. My parents taught me to work hard, put others first, and keep the home fires burning. That's exactly what I did. When I married my husband, George, I became the backbone of our family. I cooked 3 square meals a day, kept our house on Maple Street spotless, and raised our 3 children, Michael, Daniel, and Emily, with every bit of love I had. I was the one stitching Halloween costumes late at night, driving them to baseball practice and piano lessons, making sure they had everything they needed to chase their dreams. George was a good man, a factory worker with a steady hand and a quiet smile, but he leaned on me to keep our world turning. I was the glue, the unsung hero, and I took pride in it. But life doesn't always repay your efforts. George passed away suddenly. A heart attack that stole him before the ambulance could reach the hospital. I was left alone in our 2-story home, surrounded by memories, but no one to share them with. My kids were grown, with their own lives. Michael was a lawyer in Chicago. Daniel ran a construction business in Columbus, and Emily taught school in Cincinnati. They didn't need me anymore, or so I thought. At first, they'd call on Sundays or visit for Thanksgiving, but over time, the calls dwindled. The visits grew shorter. Their voices on the phone sounded rushed, distracted, always promising to stop by soon. I told myself they were just busy, that they still loved me. But deep down, I felt a chill creeping in, like frost on a winter window. Then came the diagnosis. I sat in Dr. Larson's office at the Cleveland Clinic as he delivered the news. Breast cancer, advanced stage. The words hit like a freight train. I'd always been healthy, the kind of woman who walked 2 miles every morning and volunteered at the church thrift shop. Cancer wasn't supposed to happen to me. But there it was, a shadow on the mammogram, a truth I couldn't escape. I was scared. Not just of the disease, but of facing it alone. I'd spent my life caring for others, George, the kids, even my neighbors. But now, who would care for me? I kept the news to myself for weeks, too proud to burden my children, too afraid of their indifference. But eventually, I had to tell them. I needed to know if they'd show up when it mattered most. I called each of them, my hands trembling as I dialed. Michael promised to visit as soon as I can get away from the office. Daniel said he'd bring his wife and kids over next weekend. Emily cried on the phone, swearing she'd be there. I clung to their words like lifelines, convincing myself they'd come through. But days turned into weeks, and the promises faded. Michael sent a text. "Swamped with a big case, Mom, but I'll call soon." Daniel claimed his business was crazy right now. Emily said her students were preparing for state tests, and she couldn't leave them. Excuses piled up like autumn leaves, and I was left raking them alone. By the time I was admitted to the hospital for chemotherapy, I'd grown used to the silence. The nurses were kind, the doctors professional, but their compassion couldn't fill the void where my family should have been. That's when I met Sophie. She was in the bed next to mine in the oncology ward, a young woman, frail but fierce, with a spark in her brown eyes that refused to dim. Sophie was battling leukemia, but her spirit was unbroken. She'd been in and out of hospitals since she was a teenager, yet she carried herself with a lightness I couldn't fathom. The first day we met, she turned to me with a grin and said, "So, Eleanor, what's your story? You look like you've got some good ones." I was startled. Most people in the hospital kept to themselves, but her warmth was disarming. We started talking, and before I knew it, I was laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so alive. Sophie had a way of making the sterile hospital room feel like a cozy living room. She'd tell stories about her life, growing up in foster care in Pittsburgh, bouncing from one home to another, never knowing stability. Her mother died when she was young, and her father was a name she didn't care to remember. Despite the pain in her past, she was full of life, cracking jokes about the hospital food or sneaking me an extra Jell-O cup from the cafeteria. She'd help me with small things, adjusting my pillow, fetching water when my IV made it hard to move. It wasn't just her kindness. It was the way she saw me, not as a sick old woman, but as a person with a story worth hearing. In a world where I'd become invisible to my own children, Sophie made me feel seen. Over the weeks, our bond grew. I told her about my life, about George's love for old jazz records, about the time Michael won the spelling bee in 5th grade, about Emily's wedding in the backyard under a canopy of fairy lights. I also shared the pain, the slow drift of my children, the way their absence carved a hole in my heart. Sophie listened, her eyes soft but never pitying. She shared her own regrets, how she'd dreamed of becoming a nurse, but illness had derailed her plans. We were from different worlds, separated by decades, but we understood each other. We both knew what it was to feel abandoned, to crave connection in a world that had turned its back. As my treatment wore on, the reality of my children's absence became undeniable. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering why they couldn't find an hour to visit. I'd check my phone, hoping for a missed call, a text, anything. But there was nothing. The hospital became my world, and Sophie became my anchor. She'd sit with me during chemo, holding my hand when the nausea hit, distracting me with stories or silly games like Guess the Soap Opera Plot. One day, she brought me a small potted plant, a bright green pothos, and said, "This is for you, Eleanor. Something to remind you life's still growing, even in here." That plant sat on my bedside table, a symbol of hope I hadn't realized I needed. But with hope came a painful truth. My children had made their choice. They'd shown me, through their silence, that I was no longer a priority. I'd spent my life believing family was forever, that love was unconditional, but now I saw it differently. Love wasn't just a word, it was action, presence, sacrifice. Sophie, a stranger who owed me nothing, was giving me what my own flesh and blood wouldn't. That realization hit me like a tidal wave, and it changed everything. One sleepless night, as the hospital hummed with its quiet nighttime rhythm, I made a decision. It wasn't impulsive. It was a clarity that had been building for weeks. I'd spent my life giving everything to my children, my time, my money, my heart. But they'd shown me they didn't value it. I couldn't keep pretending, couldn't keep waiting for them to change. I decided to rewrite my will, my estate, my house, my savings, the life insurance George had left. It wasn't much, but it was mine to give. And I wanted to give it to Sophie, the one person who'd been there when no one else was. It wasn't just about money. It was about acknowledging her, about giving her the stability she'd never had. It was also about me, about choosing myself for the first time in decades. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a kind man who'd handled George's estate years ago. I told him what I wanted, to make Sophie my sole beneficiary. He was surprised, but didn't question me. "Are you sure, Eleanor?" he asked. "This is a big step." I was sure. I'd never been more certain of anything. I told Sophie later that day, expecting her to protest, and she did. "Eleanor, no," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't take this. It's too much." I took her hand, my voice steady. "Sophie, you've given me more than money could ever buy. You've been my family when my own couldn't be bothered. This is my choice, and it's for you." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue further. She hugged me, and in that moment, I felt a weight lift. For the first time in years, I was doing something for me. Not for my children, not for the family I'd been trying to hold together, but for the woman I'd become. I knew my children wouldn't take it well, but I was ready to face their anger. I'd spent too long living for them, and now it was my turn to live for myself. The fallout came faster than I expected. A week after the will was changed, Michael called. His voice was cold, clipped, the way it got when he was preparing for a courtroom battle. "Mom, we heard about the will," he said. "You're leaving everything to that girl? Some kid you barely know?" I braced myself, my heart racing, but my resolve firm. "Her name is Sophie, Michael, and she's been here for me. Where were you, de Billeville? Where were any of you?" He fumbled, his anger faltering for a moment. "We've been busy, Mom. You know that. But we're your kids. We deserve what you've worked for." The word deserve lit a fire in me. "You deserve nothing," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "I gave you everything, my whole life, and you couldn't spare an hour when I needed you most. Sophie's been here. She's earned it." Michael hung up, but the calls kept coming. Daniel was next, his voice loud, accusing me of losing my mind. "You're throwing away our inheritance for some stranger? What's wrong with you, Mom?" Emily was the worst. She cried, playing the victim, saying I was tearing the family apart. "We love you, Mom," she sobbed. "How can you do this to us?" I wanted to believe her, but her tears were for the money, not for me. I'd heard too many empty promises to fall for it again. Each call chipped away at my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. They'd made their choices, and now I was making mine. The hospital days blurred together. Chemo sessions, blood tests, the constant hum of machines. But Sophie was there through it all. She'd read to me from old novels, her voice soothing as she brought Jane Austen and Agatha Christie to life. She'd bring me coffee from the hospital cafeteria, knowing I hated the decaf they served. She'd even sneak in homemade cookies from a nurse who'd taken a liking to her. Those small acts of care meant more than I could ever express. They were proof that family wasn't about blood. It was about who showed up. Then came the legal battle. My children hired a lawyer, claiming I wasn't of sound mind, that Sophie had manipulated me. They painted her as a gold digger, a predator preying on a vulnerable old woman. It was laughable, but it hurt. I'd raised them to be better than this, to value love over money. But here they were, fighting over scraps they hadn't earned. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a rock. He gathered statements from the hospital staff who'd seen Sophie's devotion firsthand. He had my medical records, proving I was lucid and capable of making decisions. But the process was grueling. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I was tearing apart what little family I had left. The court date was set for a crisp autumn afternoon. Sophie pushed my wheelchair into the courthouse, her presence a quiet strength. My children sat across the room, their faces hard, their eyes avoiding mine. Michael spoke first, his lawyer voice polished but cold. "Your Honor, my mother is unwell. She's been influenced by this young woman who's taken advantage of her vulnerability." Sophie stood up, her voice steady. "I'm not here for Eleanor's money. I'm here because she's my friend, my family. I've been with her every day, not because I want something, but because I care. Her children weren't there. I was." I spoke too, my voice weaker than I wanted, but clear. "Your Honor, I've spent my life giving to my children. I raised them, supported them, loved them. But when I got sick, they disappeared. Sophie's been my rock, my daughter in every way that matters. This is my choice, and I stand by it." The judge listened, his face unreadable. He adjourned the hearing, promising a ruling soon. The wait was torture, but Sophie kept me grounded. We'd sit on the hospital balcony, watching the leaves fall, talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about her dreams of traveling to Paris one day, and I'd share stories of George and me dancing to Sinatra in our living room. Those moments were my lifeline. The ruling came a week later. Mr. Henderson called, his voice calm but triumphant. "Eleanor, the judge ruled in your favor. The will stands. Sophie is your beneficiary." I couldn't speak for a moment, the relief overwhelming. Sophie hugged me, her eyes shining. "We did it, Eleanor," she whispered. But victory didn't feel like I'd expected. I'd won, but I'd lost my children. They hadn't called since the hearing, and part of me wondered if they ever would. The house on Maple Street, the one I'd raised them in, felt like a ghost of a life I no longer lived. Sophie and I started planning a new chapter. My cancer was in remission, a small miracle the doctors hadn't expected. With the money from George's insurance, we found a little cottage in a quiet town outside Cleveland, a place with a wraparound porch and a garden I could tend. We moved in as the daffodils were blooming. The house was small, nothing like the sprawling home I'd shared with George, but it was ours. We'd spend evenings on the porch, sipping iced tea and listening to the crickets. Sophie would play her guitar, her fingers dancing over the strings, filling the air with soft melodies. I'd knit, my hands slower than they used to be, but steady. It was a simple life, but it was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender, Sophie turned to me. "Eleanor," I was thinking, "let's take a trip. Maybe to the Smoky Mountains. Just you and me." I laughed, the idea catching me off guard. "At my age, I haven't traveled in years." She grinned. "Age is just a number. You've got life left in you, and I want us to live it." Her words sank in, and for the first time, I believed her. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Sophie had become my daughter, not by blood, but by choice, and together we were building something new. But the past wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks after we settled into the cottage, there was a knock at the door. It was Michael, his face lined with a weariness I hadn't seen before. "Mom?" he said, his voice softer than I remembered. "Can we talk?" I let him in, my heart pounding. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands clasped tightly. "I don't agree with what you did," he began. "But I've been thinking. We let you down. I let you down. I was so caught up in my own life, I didn't see how much you needed us. I'm sorry." His words hit me hard. I'd waited years for an apology, but now that it was here, it felt incomplete. It wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation I'd once dreamed of, but it was something. "Thank you, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "But I've made my peace. I hope you can too." He nodded, his eyes glistening, and left without another word. I didn't know if we'd ever be close again, but his apology was a small bridge, a crack in the wall between us. The days passed, and life settled into a gentle rhythm. Sophie and I planted a vegetable garden, our hands dirty with soil, our laughter filling the air. We'd go to the local farmers market on Saturdays, picking out peaches and homemade jams. I'd sit in the town library, reading memoirs and writing letters I'd never send. To George, to my children, to the woman I used to be. Sophie started taking online classes, determined to become a nurse despite her illness. Her resilience inspired me, reminded me that it's never too late to start over. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the dusk, I realized something. For years, I'd defined myself by my role: wife, mother, caretaker. I'd thought my worth lay in what I could give others, but now I was learning to live for myself. Sophie had shown me that love isn't about what you owe someone, it's about what you choose to give. She'd chosen me, and I'd chosen her. Together, we'd built a family, not bound by blood, but by something stronger: trust, care, and mutual respect. I don't know how many years I have left. Cancer is a shadow that never fully leaves. But I'm not afraid anymore. I've found peace in this little cottage, in the quiet moments with Sophie, in the knowledge that I'm finally living on my terms. My children may never fully understand my choice, but that's okay. I've stopped needing their approval. I've stopped chasing a past that can't be fixed. Instead, I'm embracing the present, this life I've built with Sophie, this family we've created from the ashes of what was. As I sit here, the stars twinkling above, I think about the woman I was and the woman I've become. I've learned that life isn't about the things you leave behind: houses, money, legacies. It's about the people who stay, the ones who hold your hand when the world falls apart. Sophie is that person for me, and I'm that person for her. We're not perfect, but we're enough. And for the first time in my life, I can say I'm truly home. Thanks for listening. If this story touched you, please share your own in the comments. I'd love to hear it. Let me know where you're from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters. Until next time, keep choosing yourself.